The chapel smelled faintly of rain and carnations. Rows of uniforms filled every pew. Blue, gray, and black fabric blending under the muted gold of the stained glass light. A folded flag rested at the front beside a framed photograph. Major Evelyn Morgan, smiling from the cockpit of her rescue plane. Her flight jacket had been repaired and polished, though the tear over her heart was still visible, left that way by request. Captain Leah Morgan stood at the podium, fingers gripping the wooden edge until her knuckles blanched. She'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. Every word of her mother's final letter had become muscle memory. But memory never sounded the same when you said it out loud. Her voice trembled as she began. My mother once wrote, "Courage isn't flying into danger. It's landing somewhere you're needed." The officers in the front row bowed their heads. The soft rhythm of rain against the glass became part of the silence, not breaking it, only breathing through it. Leah turned a page, her throat tightening. She believed duty meant seeing faces, not ranks. Saving strangers because they were ours, even if the world forgot their names. Her words should have carried peace. Instead, they struck something brittle in the air. From the second row, a voice cut through, rough, old, and sharp enough to wound. She doesn't deserve to speak for her mother. Gasps rippled across the chapel. Heads turned. Colonel Frank Morgan, retired, decorated, once the Air Force's golden pilot, sat rigid in his chair. His medals gleamed like accusation. His eyes, cold and sunken, fixed on her with a hatred only grief could ferment. For a long moment, no one breathed. Leah's hand trembled, then steadied. She closed the letter gently, as if tucking her mother's memory back into its envelope. She looked straight at him. "You're right, Dad," she said softly, voice trembling but unbroken. "But I'll finish what she started." The sentence landed like a stone in water, quiet but irreversible. The chaplain shifted, trying to resume the service, but the spell had been broken. Conversations whispered like wind through tall grass. An aide reached toward the colonel, murmuring, "Sir, maybe step outside." He didn't move. He just stared, jaw tight, hands shaking, fury and grief wrestling behind his eyes. "You think this show fixes anything?" he hissed under his breath. "You think reading letters turns you into her?" Leah didn't answer. She gathered the papers, her composure a shield forged by years of living under that tone. As she turned from the podium, her boots echoed softly on the marble. Each step a refusal to shrink. Outside, thunder rolled faintly. A low, delayed applause from the heavens her mother once flew through. After the ceremony, the crowd poured out under umbrellas. Reporters lingered, hovering near the colonel, their cameras pretending not to be aimed. He lit a cigarette under the awning, ignoring them. The smoke curled like the ghosts he refused to bury. A young lieutenant approached, awkwardly. "Sir, your daughter gave a fine tribute. Major Morgan would have been proud." Frank snorted. "You didn't know Evelyn. She died because she tried to be a hero. My daughter's doing the same." He flicked ash into the puddle at his feet. "Difference is," he muttered, "one of them knew what she was doing." Inside the chapel, Leah stood alone by the photo table. Her mother's wings, the insignia she'd earned during her last mission, rested beside a vase of wilted orchids. Leah traced the engraved initials, E.M. Lieutenant Sam Park, her co-pilot and oldest friend, appeared beside her, dripping from the rain. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She smiled, small, strained. "That depends on your definition. Your dad's out there giving the press his 'grief made me cruel' speech." "Good," she said. "Maybe someone should hear it." Sam hesitated. "He's broken, Leah." "Maybe don't," she cut him off. "He's not broken. He's comfortable. There's a difference." He studied her, then nodded slowly. "You're still gonna do it, aren't you?" She looked at her mother's photo, the same confident grin, the same storm behind the eyes. "She left something unfinished," Leah said, "and I'm not leaving it that way." Sam sighed. You realize he'll hate you more for it. Then I guess I'll earn it properly this time. When she left the chapel, her father was still standing under the awning, smoke curling around him like armor. He didn't look at her as she passed, just said, almost casually, "You're not her, Leah. Don't die trying to be." She stopped. Rain dripped from her hair onto her dress blues. "You already decided what I was," she said. "The rest is up to me." He scoffed but didn't follow. As she walked away, thunder cracked again, louder this time. She didn't flinch. That night, back at the base, Leah sat on her bunk with her mother's flight log open on her lap. The pages smelled faintly of jet fuel and salt, the scent of distance. Near the back, under a list of coordinates and radio times, her mother had written a final note in blue ink. Storm aborted. Coordinates unserved. Luzon relief incomplete. Beside it, a single circle around one phrase. Mercy line. Leah ran her thumb across the ink. It had smudged slightly, as if Evelyn had hesitated mid-word. One unfinished breath frozen in time. Mercy line, she whispered. Let's see where you were headed. She reached for her laptop, input the coordinates. The map blinked to life. A cluster of islands, forgotten in the Pacific, names barely visible. It wasn't just a route. It was a graveyard of promises. And somewhere, deep in her bones, Leah felt her mother's voice again. The same calm tone that had guided her through every flight check, every night alone. Finish what I started. She looked out the window. The rain hadn't stopped. It never really did. By the time dawn broke, she would already have filed the request to revive Operation Mercy Line, the mission her mother died completing, the one her father had forbidden her from ever touching. And in the storm that awaited, she wouldn't just chase her mother's ghost. She'd confront the one her father had become. The morning after the memorial, the base airstrip was still slick with rain. Dawn fog rolled across the tarmac like breath, soft and pale. Captain Leah Morgan stood beside her C-130, coffee in one hand, her mother's logbook in the other. The airman prepping the plane gave her a wide berth. They'd seen the footage. Half the base had. The clip of Colonel Frank Morgan interrupting his daughter's speech had gone semi-viral overnight, muted but haunting. Someone had tagged it, "The Disgrace of the Sky." Leah didn't read comments anymore. The words still echoed, though. She doesn't deserve to speak for her mother. She'd heard worse from him before, but never that. Never in uniform, never in public, and never on the day her mother's memory was supposed to be holy. It wasn't cruelty anymore. It was decay. His pride had turned to rust. Her father, Colonel Frank Morgan, hadn't always been a ghost of himself. Once, he'd been a storm pilot, the kind who could thread a fighter through crosswinds and bring it home unscratched. He'd met Major Evelyn Morgan during a joint rescue op. She'd been commanding a medical evac in the same storm. The story became legend. Two pilots finding each other in the eye of chaos. But after Evelyn's last mission, the one in Luzon that took her plane and her life, Frank had come home a man rearranged. He quit active service, buried himself in consulting, and lived as though emotion were classified information. He wore his guilt like a uniform. Every photo of Evelyn in the house stayed framed, untouched and dusted weekly. Every mention of Leah's name, however, earned only sighs or silence. The one time she'd told him she wanted to fly, he'd stared through her. You think you're honoring her. You're repeating her mistake. At the Air Force Academy, Leah had been the student who never smiled. She broke records quietly, aced navigation, earned respect, but not attention. On graduation day, she'd waited for him. A whole crowd of proud parents had filled the bleachers, cameras flashing, tears streaming. Frank Morgan never showed. When she called that night, his tone was arid as paper. You got your wings. Congratulations. You didn't come. Didn't need to. It's not the same as hers. She'd hung up, tears sliding down her cheek before she even realized they'd started. That was the first time she'd said it out loud. You don't get to decide who I become. Years later, her transfer into humanitarian aviation was supposed to be temporary, a short assignment to coordinate air relief drops. But Leah discovered something there that none of her father's glory missions had ever given her. Purpose. While others fought wars, she fought weather. Her unit didn't drop bombs, they dropped hope, food, medicine, radios. And in that work, she saw glimpses of her mother everywhere. Not just in the old photos, but in every civilian who waved as her plane disappeared into clouds. The squadron called her Echo because, as Sam once said, every time you talk in flight, it's like someone's answering from before. Now, standing on the runway, she flipped open her mother's flight log again. The final entries were brief, mechanical. Altitude readings, cargo counts, weather data, until the very last line. Coordinates unreachable. We'll try again if fuel permits. Beneath it, a hand-drawn symbol. A circle bisected by a single line. Evelyn's signature for mission incomplete. Leah traced it gently. Not anymore, she whispered. Sam's voice came from behind her. You really doing this? She didn't turn. I already filed the flight plan. You realize your father's going to go nuclear. He still has friends at command. I'm not asking him for permission. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Leah, Luzon's no easy flight. It's typhoon season again. Same window as hers, Leah finished for him. That's why it has to be now. Later that afternoon, she sat in her quarters, surrounded by half-packed duffels and open folders. The desk lamp flickered, casting gold over old photos. Her mother laughing beside her plane. Her father standing in the background, stoic and unreadable. Her phone buzzed. Colonel Frank Morgan. She hesitated, then answered. Leah? Sir. There was a long silence, then, I saw the report. You requested Operation Mercy Line reactivation. Yes. You're not authorized. I am. Humanitarian Command cleared it this morning. Then you lied to them. She bit back the surge of heat in her chest. No, Dad. I just didn't ask for your blessing. You have no idea what that route is, what it cost. I know exactly what it cost. His tone hardened. Your mother's blood is still in that wreckage, Leah. You really want to chase ghosts? She closed her eyes. Maybe ghosts are the only ones worth chasing. He went quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice had thinned. You think this will bring her back? It won't. I tried. I spent 10 years flying recon over that same grid. Nothing but ocean and regret. I'm not flying for her, Leah said softly. I'm flying for the people she didn't reach. His silence this time wasn't anger. It was fear disguised as command. Leah, listen to me. You won't make it. That corridor eats aircraft. If she couldn't beat it, you won't either. Then maybe she left it for me to finish. The line went dead. That night, she dreamed of rain. Not gentle, but endless. A sky that wouldn't close. In her dream, she stood on the edge of her mother's old airstrip. The wind howled, tearing at her flight jacket. From the clouds came a faint hum. Not thunder, but the rhythmic beat of propellers. Her mother's voice whispered through the storm. Finish it, Leah. Not for me, for them. When she woke, the world outside was silent again. The storm was coming back. She could feel it in the pressure, in the way her bones hummed like radar. At dawn, she walked into her hangar. Sam was already there, clipboard in hand, expression somewhere between concern and surrender. Crews prepped. Weather windows closing fast. You've got 6 hours before we lose satellite coverage. Then 6 hours is what we'll use. He handed her a flight patch, blue with a white circle and a single line through it. She frowned. This is, he nodded, your mother's old insignia. I had it remade. Leah swallowed hard. Thanks. He smiled faintly. Try to come back wearing it. As she climbed into the cockpit, her fingers brushed the worn leather of the yoke, her mother's model, rebuilt. The same control she'd once learned to fly on. Sam's voice came through the intercom. Base tower cleared. Mercy Line 1, you are go for takeoff. The engines thundered to life. Leah closed her eyes and whispered to no one, for the ones waiting. Then the aircraft roared down the runway and lifted into the storm. The same clouds that had taken her mother. The same path that had broken her father. the same sky that would finally make them one family again. Halfway through the mission, the storm will turn, history repeating itself. Leah will face the same winds, the same choice, the same failure her mother once met. And far away, in his quiet house surrounded by medals and guilt, Colonel Frank Morgan will watch the news as the past threatens to claim his daughter too. Unless he does what he's never done before, believe in her. By the time Leah hit the Luzon corridor, the horizon had vanished. The storm was moving faster than predicted, a rotating wall of rain swallowing the coastline below. The radar screamed static. The altimeter flickered between sanity and chaos. Wind shoved at the aircraft like it was personal. "Mercy Line 1 to base," she called into her headset. "Visibility under 200. Adjusting altitude to 12,000. Only static answered. She tried again, louder this time. "Base. Confirm relay channel 39. Do you copy?" Still nothing. From the co-pilot's seat, Lieutenant Sam Park wiped condensation off the window and muttered, "We're flying blind, Leah." Her voice stayed level. Not blind. Just ahead of the map, Sam shook his head. "You sound like her." Leah didn't reply. The cockpit shuddered as a gust slammed them sideways. The navigation screen blinked red. Autopilot disengaged. Sam gripped the yoke. "That's it. We're turning around." Leah's hand clamped over his. "No, not yet." "Leah." "She stopped here," she said, pointing to the GPS. "This is where Mom turned back. I'm not repeating that part." He stared at her, then the instruments, then finally exhaled. "You're insane." "Maybe," she said, eyes narrowing against the lightning outside. But she was right about one thing. Courage isn't flying into danger. It's landing where you're needed. At that exact moment, 3,000 miles away, Colonel Frank Morgan sat in his living room, staring at a flickering television screen. The emergency weather broadcast scrolled across the bottom in bold red. "Typhoon Talara makes landfall. Relief flight missing radar contact." His coffee went cold. He knew that call sign. Mercy Line 1. He fumbled for his phone. "This is Colonel Morgan, retired. Get me command. Humanitarian Operations Desk." "Sir, that line's restricted. It's my daughter in that aircraft. Patch me through." A pause. Then, "Sir, she's out of range. We lost signal an hour ago." The words sank into him like shrapnel. He'd heard them once before. "We lost signal an hour ago." That was the sentence they'd used when Evelyn's plane disappeared. He'd spent a decade trying to drown that sound. In bourbon, in silence, in bitterness. And now it was back. He rose to his feet, heart hammering. "Where's her last ping?" "Sector 9, Luzon East Ridge." He grabbed his old flight jacket, the one that still smelled faintly of jet fuel and grief, and left the house without locking the door. Back in the cockpit, Leah gritted her teeth as rain pounded the windshield hard enough to sound like gunfire. The aircraft bucked violently, alarms screaming in protest. "Left engine torque's peaking," Sam shouted. "We've got a surge." "Feather it," she barked. He adjusted the lever. The engine's scream dulled to a guttural growl. Leah scanned the map. The coordinates circled in her mother's handwriting blinked faintly on the secondary screen. "We're close." "Close to what? The crash site?" She shook her head. "To where she was going." Below them, through the gray torrent, a faint outline appeared. A cluster of hills, carved with what looked like trails. But they weren't trails. They were villages, cut off by flooding. Sam's voice broke. "Oh my God, there are people down there." Leah nodded, throat tight. She wasn't chasing ghosts. She was trying to reach them. The relief bay indicator blinked amber. She hit the intercom. "Crew, prepare for low-altitude drop. We're finishing this mission." "Ma'am, we'll lose altitude stability," came the response. "Then we'll hold it manually," she said. They dove lower, slicing through sheets of rain. The airframe groaned. Sam's knuckles whitened around the controls. Leah guided the aircraft by instinct now, by the memory of her mother's old training lessons, her voice echoing faintly in her head. "When you lose sight, fly the feeling. Let the storm talk. It always does." She banked right, barely clearing the ridge. Below, Rooftops peeked through floodwater. Dozens of figures waved, barely visible, clutching pieces of blue tarp. Sam stared, awestruck. Those villages were written off weeks ago. Leah flipped the switch. Not anymore. She opened the drop bay. Cargo crates tumbled out, parachutes blossoming like silver flowers against the storm. Food, medicine, radio sets. All the things Evelyn's plane had carried but never delivered. For a brief second, lightning illuminated the sky, and Leah caught a glimpse of a face in her memory. Her mother, laughing, goggles perched on her head, saying, "The hardest storms never wanted to hurt you. They just wanted to see if you'd stay." She smiled into the chaos. "We stayed, Mom." Meanwhile, Colonel Frank Morgan stood at the Air Operations Command Center, drenched from rain, breathless from running. "Patch me into her frequency," he demanded. A technician hesitated. "Sir, she's off-grid. Try it anyway." Static filled the speakers. Then, faintly, a voice. "Mercy Line 1. Drop complete. Coordinates stable. Moving to second grid." Frank gripped the edge of the console. "That's her." "Signal's fading again," the tech said. "She's heading straight into the eye." Frank's voice cracked. "Don't." Not there. In the aircraft, the turbulence worsened. The sky darkened to near black. Lightning tore across the clouds like splitting glass. "Leah!" Sam shouted. "We're at fuel minimums. One more drop," she yelled back. The controls jerked violently. The aircraft listed. Sam reached for the eject beacon. "We can't survive another pass." Leah's hand shot out, slamming it back down. "No, we finish it." The cargo light turned green. She hit the release. The final crate disappeared into the storm, parachute blooming into the dark. "Mission complete," she breathed. Then everything went white. A blast of air pressure ripped through the cabin, the right wing catching a crosswind that snapped metal like bone. The cockpit alarms blared. "Stall, stall, stall," Sam screamed. "Brace!" Leah pulled against the controls with everything she had. Her mother's voice echoed again, soft this time. "Finish what I started," and Leah whispered back, "I did." The aircraft slammed into the cloud bank, tumbling, screaming, vanishing into the storm. Back in the control tower, the signal blinked out. The radar sweep showed nothing but noise. Frank Morgan stared at the screen, frozen, every nerve locked. "We lost signal an hour ago." No one dared say it this time. He closed his eyes, the memory of Evelyn's last transmission clawing at him. "I'm turning back." And then the silence. But Leah hadn't turned back. She'd gone through. He whispered to the empty air, "Please, not again." Hours later, somewhere over the drenched mountains, the storm began to break. The clouds tore open like a curtain, sunlight pouring through. A battered gray aircraft emerged, wings fractured, engines stuttering, but still flying. Inside, Leah's hand bled against the throttle. Sam was coughing, dazed, but alive. She smiled through tears, voice barely audible through static. "Mercy Line 1, to base. Mission complete." When the broadcast aired, the world saw not a soldier defying weather, but a daughter defying history. And for Colonel Frank Morgan, watching from the tarmac, the signal that once meant loss now carried something new, redemption demanding to be answered. By dawn, the typhoon had collapsed into silence. Waves shimmered under the new light, rolling over the skeletons of trees and half-flooded rooftops. The relief crews were still trying to trace Leah's beacon when the first survivor reports came through, static-laced, breathless, and impossible to ignore. Supplies came from the sky, parachutes, medicine. The storm brought them. In villages that had been written off as gone, people were standing with food in their hands, wrapped in emergency blankets stamped with the insignia of the Air Force Humanitarian Corps. And somewhere in that silence, Captain Leah Morgan lay half-conscious in the tilted cockpit of her downed plane. Rain dripped through a crack in the canopy, the smell of burned metal mixed with salt. "Sam?" she croaked. A groan answered from behind her. "Still here. Remind me to never complain about turbulence again." She smiled weakly, relief cracking through the pain. Her ribs ached with every breath, but the sound of his voice was proof enough. They'd made it. Outside, the jungle shimmered in early light. It wasn't the wreckage that stunned her, it was the view. Hundreds of villagers on the distant ridge, waving the same white parachutes that had carried their salvation hours before. Sam followed her gaze. They found us. Leah whispered, "No, we found them." Back home at Andrews Air Base, the command center was chaos. Screens flashed data, officers shouted coordinates, and every monitor in the room streamed live footage from Luzon. Villagers lifting supply crates marked Mercy Line. But the one man standing in the corner, arms crossed, face unreadable, wasn't celebrating. Colonel Frank Morgan had returned. His uniform didn't fit quite like it used to. He hadn't worn it in years, yet here he was, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the main feed. "Has her beacon reactivated?" he asked. A lieutenant shook his head. "Negative, sir. But survivors confirmed the drops matched her route exactly." "She's alive," he muttered. "Sir?" He straightened, voice hard. "If they got those supplies, she's alive." The general in charge, Major Ellis, approached cautiously. "Colonel Morgan, we're all praying she is, but the terrain—" "I didn't ask for prayers," he snapped. "I asked for a search pattern." The general hesitated. "You're retired." Frank glared at him. "Then unretire me for 24 hours. She's my daughter." The room went quiet. Moments later, the order was signed. By the time his chopper reached Luzon, the jungle steam hit like a wall. The air reeked of diesel and wet soil. The relief teams were already combing through wreckage zones. When they found the remains of the Mercy Line aircraft, Frank was the first to climb out. The fuselage lay wedged between trees, torn open at the nose. Inside, he saw blood on the console, and 2 sets of footprints leading away from the crash. He touched the pilot's seat, whispering under his breath, "You stubborn, reckless kid." Behind him, a soldier shouted, "Colonel! Over here!" Through the mist, 2 figures appeared, one limping, one helping. Frank's breath caught. It was her. Leah looked up, dazed but standing. Her face was streaked with dirt, hair plastered to her temples, one arm in a makeshift sling. For a moment, neither moved. The father who had humiliated her at a memorial was now staring at her like he'd seen a ghost. "You came," she said, barely a whisper. He swallowed hard. "You finished it." She nodded weakly. Mom's coordinates were right. The villages still needed the drop. He took a step forward. "You could have died." She met his eyes. So did she. "That's why I didn't stop." Something broke in his face. Not pride, not pain, but both at once. He reached out, fingers trembling, and for the first time in years, he pulled her into an embrace. It was awkward, hesitant, almost clumsy, the kind of hug built by decades of absence. But it was real. Hours later, back at the temporary command post, Leah sat under a tent, her mother's old logbook open on her lap. Her father sat beside her, silent. The pages were soaked, but the ink still showed. Evelyn Morgan's last entry, the one he'd refused to read for years, was there. "If I don't make it, tell Frank not to ground himself. Tell Leah that storms don't take, they reveal." He stared at the line for a long time. She wrote that the night before the crash. Leah closed the book gently. "You never read it?" He shook his head. "Couldn't." "And now?" His voice cracked. "Now I see she was talking to both of us." The relief operation named her flight Operation Mercy Line. Completed. Every network ran the footage. Every major paper ran her photo. Leah saluting under the rain, standing beside villagers clutching food crates. But for Leah, the real moment came 2 weeks later, in the hospital, when the door opened quietly and her father stepped in. Not in uniform this time, but in a plain shirt, holding a letter. He placed it on her tray table. "It's from your mother." "I never gave it to you," Leah frowned. You had one of her letters? He nodded slowly. She left it for you. I couldn't bear to read it then. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unmistakable. Curved, clean, full of movement. If you ever fly again, Leah, don't do it for me. Do it for the ones who can't. I love you more for standing than for flying. The words blurred through her tears. When she looked up, her father was watching her. Eyes red, voice unsteady.
I think I understand her now, he said. And you.
Leah reached out, covering his hand with hers. It only took a storm. He smiled faintly. You're your mother's daughter. She shook her head. No, I'm yours too. I just learned to fly through what grounded you. That night, Frank stood alone on the hospital balcony, staring at the stars above the dark Pacific. The storm had passed, but its memory lingered in the scent of wet metal and salt. He thought of Evelyn's laughter, Leah's defiance, and the silence he'd used to punish both. And for the first time since the crash that stole his wife, he whispered into the night, "Thank you for not turning back." Inside, Leah dreamed of her mother's voice again. Not in sorrow this time, but pride. You finished it, kiddo. That's all any of us ever needed. When the commendation ceremony came weeks later, the world expected a military speech. But when Leah stood at the podium beside her father, the man who once called her a disgrace, the true mission ended not with applause, but with a single shared salute seen around the world. The morning of the commendation ceremony dawned golden and windless. Washington's airbase stretched quiet under a clear sky, flags snapping gently along the runway's edge. From the bleachers, families in dress blues filled the rows. Wives, husbands, children, the living echoes of service. The band polished brass under the sun. Reporters crowded the front line. And at the center of the stage, a single seat remained empty. It was reserved for Colonel Frank Morgan. Inside a dressing tent, Captain Leah Morgan fastened the silver clasp of her uniform jacket. Her hand hesitated over the insignia, her mother's old wings. She'd had them restored, polished until the metal caught every glint of light. Her reflection stared back from the mirror, older than the girl who once trembled under her father's silence, stronger than the woman who had flown through hell to end it. "Ready?" Sam Park asked, peeking in through the flap. Leah nodded. "As I'll ever be. You sure about this speech?" She smiled faintly. "It's not a speech. It's an ending." When she walked onto the stage, the crowd rose instinctively. Her limp was barely noticeable, her bearing pure steel. She saluted the flag, then turned toward the audience, toward the front row where her father now sat, uniform pressed, face unreadable. The applause quieted. Cameras focused. Leah took the podium. 10 years ago, I failed my father's expectations. I failed officer school. I failed to be the kind of soldier he believed in. A murmur rippled through the audience. Frank looked down. But the thing about failure, she continued, is that it teaches you the sound of silence, the one you hear right before courage begins. She paused, scanning the crowd. Last month, our team completed Operation Mercy Line, a mission my mother began and never finished. I didn't fly through that storm to prove I could survive it. I flew because hundreds of people were still waiting for her promise. The camera panned across the audience. Villagers from Luzon, seated among dignitaries, their weathered hands clasped together, eyes shining. Leah went on, her voice calm but edged with fire. My mother believed storms reveal. She was right. They revealed her strength. And later, they revealed my father's. Every lens turned toward Frank Morgan. Leah's eyes softened. When the call came to rescue our aircraft, he came without orders, without hesitation, because for the first time in years we were no longer divided by loss. We were united by duty. She looked at him fully now. You once told me I'd never fly like her. You were right. I didn't. I learned to fly with her, and with you. The crowd was silent. Not respectful silence. Reverent silence. The kind that trembles. A tear rolled down Frank's cheek before he could stop it. He rose from his chair. The cameras caught it. The old colonel, spine straight, eyes bright with age and regret. He raised his hand in a perfect, deliberate salute. For a split second, Leah hesitated. Then she returned it. A single gesture, but it carried the weight of decades. The salute wasn't a father to a daughter, nor an officer to another. It was from one survivor to another. The general stepped forward, his voice carrying over the PA. By order of the United States Air Force, Captain Leah Morgan is hereby awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for valor and completion of Operation Mercy Line. The medal glinted as he pinned it to her chest. The applause thundered, rolling, unstoppable. Reporters surged forward. Flashbulbs exploded like stars. Leah stepped back, eyes on the horizon. The applause blurred into something softer, the low hum of her mother's voice in memory. You did it, kiddo. You brought him home, too. After the ceremony, the airfield emptied slowly. Banners fluttered, microphones cooled, and sunlight faded to amber. Leah stood alone near the parked aircraft, hand resting on its wing. Frank approached quietly. The distance between them, once a chasm, now felt small enough to cross with a breath. He cleared his throat. You were magnificent up there. She smiled. You hated speeches. Still do. But that wasn't a speech. That was the truth landing. She looked at him, curious. You remembered what she used to say. He nodded. Every word. I just didn't have the courage to listen until now. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded envelope, the edges worn soft. This was the letter she wrote for me, he said, the one I never opened. Leah frowned. Why now? He handed it to her. Because you deserve to read it first. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was the same, her mother's. Frank, if you're reading this, it means I didn't come home. Don't let grief make you cruel. Don't make her earn your love. She'll do enough fighting without that weight. When she flies, remember, she's doing what you taught her, to never turn back from a sky that scares her. Leah exhaled shakily, handing it back. She forgave you before you even fell apart. Frank nodded, voice thick. And you forgave me after. No, Leah said softly. I just finished what she started. He smiled faintly. Then maybe you finished me, too. That evening, as the base lights dimmed, they stood side by side, watching the last helicopter lift off toward the horizon. The wind stirred, cool and clean after weeks of rain. Frank adjusted his cap. You know, when I called you a disgrace at your mother's memorial, Leah turned her head slightly. I remember. I was wrong. I thought I was protecting her memory, but I was just protecting my ego. Leah smiled gently. Storms have a way of washing those away. He chuckled, the sound low and cracked. Guess I had it coming. She nodded. Yeah, but you stood back up. Later, in her quarters, she placed her new medal beside her mother's old one. The two ribbons brushed, blue and red, past and present. Beside them sat the completed flight log, stamped in bold ink. Mission complete. Captain Leah Morgan. She turned off the desk lamp and sat in the dark for a moment, listening to the faint hum of distant engines. Outside, the wind rose again. Not a storm this time, but a whisper, carrying a voice only she could hear. Proud of you. Both of you. Leah smiled, tears streaking quietly down her face. For the first time, she wasn't flying alone. In the quiet after the applause, Leah would realize that finishing her mother's mission wasn't just about honoring the dead. It was about teaching the living how to forgive, how to keep flying, and how to make peace land where pride once lived. The next morning came soft and silver, with a thin mist rolling across Arlington's green expanse. The air carried the hush of ceremony, the stillness of closure. Captain Leah Morgan stood beneath a row of elms, her dress uniform pressed sharp, the metal gleaming at her chest. Beside her, Colonel Frank Morgan adjusted his cap. Older and quieter now. A man rebuilt, not reborn. They were there for Evelyn. Not her funeral, that had been years ago, but her reinstatement. After the success of Operation Mercy Line, the Air Force had posthumously restored Major Evelyn Morgan's rank and record, recognizing her final mission as a humanitarian precedent. Her name would be added to the memorial wall that morning. When they reached the engraving site, Leah's breath caught. The marble gleamed with new letters. Major Evelyn Morgan. Storms reveal. Beneath it, an empty space waited for her daughter's inscription. Someday. The chaplain spoke briefly about legacy, courage, and family. Leah barely heard the words. She was tracing her mother's name with a fingertip, her reflection faint in the marble surface. Her father broke the silence first. She'd have loved this day, he said quietly. Hated the speeches. But she'd have loved this, Leah smiled. She'd have laughed at you for crying. He gave a small, almost embarrassed chuckle. She already did. They stood like that for a long while, two silhouettes against a wall of names, both thinking about all the storms they'd survived, and the one that had finally ended between them. Later that afternoon, the base auditorium filled for the humanitarian honors ceremony. Reporters called it the Second Mercy Line. The story had spread far beyond military circles. A daughter completing her mother's mission, a father finding redemption in her courage. The hall was packed with civilians, cadets, and veterans. Cameras lined the aisles. When the announcer called her name, Leah walked onto the stage. Steady, humble, the kind of calm that comes only after weathering hell. The presenter smiled. Captain Morgan, the people of Luzon asked to give you this themselves. He gestured toward a group of villagers, elders, children, doctors, who stepped forward, holding a wooden plaque carved with her mother's insignia, a circle bisected by a single line. The elder woman bowed. Your mother gave us hope. You gave us her promise. Leah bowed back, voice trembling. She'd have said hope only matters if it's delivered. In the front row, Frank watched with tears he didn't bother to hide. His pride was no longer sharp. It was soft, clean, earned. The cameras caught him standing as the crowd erupted in applause. He turned to the reporter beside him, the same one who had once printed his cruel remark at Evelyn's memorial. I said she didn't deserve to speak, he murmured. Turns out she was the only one who should have. The reporter lowered his camera for a moment and saluted. After the ceremony, Leah found herself back at the airstrip. The day was fading, long orange shadows stretching across the concrete. Her father joined her, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning the runway where the next generation of pilots were prepping for flight. You ever think of quitting? He asked softly. Leah shrugged. Once or twice. What stopped you? She smiled faintly. The part of me that sounds like you. He blinked, surprised. You mean stubborn? Exactly. They both laughed, a sound unfamiliar, unforced, and desperately overdue. Frank grew serious again, gazing toward the horizon. When I was your age, I thought honor meant never admitting weakness. I was wrong. Leah looked at him. What does it mean now? He thought for a moment. It means saying, I'm proud of you, before it's too late. He turned to her fully, eyes steady. I'm proud of you, Leah. Not for finishing her mission, for finishing mine. Her throat tightened. And what mission was that? He smiled sadly. Teaching a Morgan how to be better than a Morgan. They stood together in the fading light, two soldiers from different wars. Hers fought in the sky, his fought inside himself. When the base loudspeakers played Retreat, Leah saluted the lowering flag. Her father joined her. Two salutes, side by side. The sun dipped behind them. And for the first time in her life, Leah felt the world go still. Weeks later, a feature ran in the Atlantic. The flight that finished a legacy. The closing paragraph read, Captain Leah Morgan didn't just complete a mission. She completed a family. When storms broke the chain of command between generations, she flew through them and brought honor home. Leah cut out the article and tucked it inside her mother's flight logbook, beside the final entry. On the back cover, she added her own. Coordinates reached. Cargo delivered. Family restored. Months passed. Seasons turned. The next time rain came, Leah didn't flinch. She stood on the porch of her father's house, coffee in hand, watching the clouds roll in. Her father joined her, older now but lighter somehow, a man who had finally put down his ghosts. You ever notice, he said, the rain sounds different after you stop fearing it. Leah smiled. It's quieter. He nodded. Maybe it's respect. She looked up into the gray sky. Maybe it's her. That night, Leah dreamed she was flying again. Not through a storm, but through sunlight breaking after it. Her mother's voice came faintly over the radio. "You carried me the rest of the way, Leah. Now, land." When she woke, her father's house was still. On the kitchen counter sat a mug, half-finished coffee, and a note written in his careful handwriting. "Gone for my morning run. Old habits die last." Below it, his old pilot's ring, polished, waiting. At his funeral months later, Leah placed that ring beside her mother's wings. The chaplain's voice trembled slightly as he read the inscription carved into the headstone. "Storms reveal." When the final salute echoed, Leah whispered under her breath, "You both finally came home." The final shot would fade to Leah walking down the airfield again, alone but not lonely, her hand brushing the aircraft hull as the engines warmed. She climbed aboard, set her helmet on the dash, and turned to the camera with a calm smile. Voiceover closing line. "Some inherit medals, others inherit unfinished promises. Both weigh the same, until you lift them." The engines roared to life. The frame widened, the plane rose, and as it disappeared into the dawn, rain began to fall again, gentle this time, as if the sky were clapping. The credits roll over a shot of the marble wall. Evelyn's name beside a fresh inscription. Captain Leah Morgan. Honor completed. Then, fade to black. A faint hum of engines continues beneath the credits, the sound of a promise kept. If you've ever been silenced, doubted, or dismissed, but rose to finish what others abandoned, subscribe for more true-hearted stories where storms reveal, pride falls, and honor flies home.